Hi there, it's Ron Gula from Gula Tech Adventures, and today we are going to talk about the touchy subject of the use of non-disclosure agreements when you're fundraising as a small startup, to NDA or to not NDA. Now, a lot of you know my background, NSA tenable, but as the president of Gula Tech Adventures, we routinely meet with startup companies who don't share an NDA with us, and we don't require them to sign an NDA either. And we are by far the norm when it comes to our industry. Now, this might surprise a lot of people, but I'm going to tell you why. Now, of course, I'm also not a lawyer. I think if you spoke with lawyers more often, especially intellectual property attorneys, they're going to tell you to always have an NDA. But I'm going to tell you a little bit more about why that's not usually the case. Now, let's say you have two interested parties. You have a founder of a company and a potential venture capital investor. They're going to want to keep their info private. Maybe the venture capital person wants to keep their info private. They both want to keep their stuff private, so they do an NDA. Well, some little bit of backgrounds on non-disclosure agreements. So first of all, they have to decide and state what is covered. What is the information that you're not supposed to disclose? On one hand, you shouldn't be pitching a venture capital firm and showing them your source code, right? Even if you are under NDA, why would you do something like that? Same thing. You might have like one reference customer, but why would you give them a list of all of your customers and whatnot? So some of this is basically common sense, but a lot of time these NDAs can be narrow or they can be broad in what they cover. Now, another thing to consider with NDAs is, are they one way or are they bi-directional? Sometimes a disclosing organization decides to sign an NDA and they're going to control what information they're given to the other party, and they're agreeing to keep that stuff secret. Sometimes it's two ways. Sometimes there's two ways, different types of information. Another thing that surprises a lot of startup founders I talk to is that you have to pick a venue for your non-disclosure agreement. What rule of law, what state in the United States, if you're based in the U.S., are you going to be subject to? You really need to think about this as if somebody breaks the NDA, where are you going to take them to court? A lot of people just use Delaware. I've seen Nevada. Sometimes they're very business-friendly states, but this is a thing that you need to kind of think about. Now, if you think about pitching a venture capital firm, what are you going to tell them? And I always like to fall back to what I recommend, the 5-slide pitch decks, right? What problem do you solve? How do you solve it? Give me some proof points. What are you going to do with the money? Why are you raising that money? And what's your business success? Now, 9 times out of 10, if somebody pitches me a product or a solution, a startup company, and they have an NDA, typically what they tell me is exactly what's on their website. In other words, they're giving me publicly available information and requiring me not to share it, right? And this is a very junior mistake to do with non-disclosure agreements. It's the wrong way to approach pitching a venture capital fund. If you can't tell me what problem you solve without telling a customer what problem you solve, that you're describing your business the wrong way, and it certainly shouldn't be disclosed to a non-disclosure agreement. On the other hand, the how you solve it, you can say how you solve it. Maybe you're using certain techniques, certain algorithms, maybe you're using AI, threat intelligence, that sort of thing. And if you want to put that in terms of a non-disclosure agreement, you very well should. But at a high level, maybe it's not that important for the first meeting. For example, if someone's going to write you a check for $1 million and buy a tenth of your company, they are eventually going to know the business of what you're doing. And I'll get to this a little bit further in the conclusion of the video. You don't have to tell them up front that maybe your algorithms all are OEM from a third party, but you should tell them it's an OEM. Maybe your detection is through threat intelligence. Maybe you don't tell them which threat, but you should tell them, look, we don't have a threat team. We're buying our threat intelligence from somebody else. These are basic business 101 decisions that you can communicate in the meeting and go on and do that. Same thing with proven. If you have your product deployed at a customer, if you have a patent, patents are public. If you have results of a customer, maybe you don't have to say which customer it is, but you can claim, I've deployed my product in such and such a way. The customers, you don't have to say who it is. We found X, Y, and Z. Again, this is not NDA level material. Now, getting into the fundraise, as a seed company, the question is, how sensitive do you want to be on that? Especially now, I'm recording this in June of 2023, when there are massive changes in valuations of companies in strategies of fundraising and whatnot. If you lock the venture capital company down to a non-disclosure agreement, they are not going to be able to communicate about your company with other potential investors. Almost nobody raises 100% of their round from one venture capital fund. They have to build a coalition. If you limit this to a non-disclosure agreement, you're going to prevent that from occurring. Now, the last thing, I always like to say, what's your vision of success? And the vision of success is not necessarily something you're putting into a business plan. It's the intent of the founding company. Now, maybe that's the most sensitive thing and probably the hardest question to ask from my 5-slide deck. And maybe that is subject to NDA, that you want to go public someday, or that you want to be acquired by Cisco someday, or you want to make a certain amount of money from your family. But it's certainly not a trade secret, and it's certainly something that you can talk around and have a sense of what's going on. Now, think about it from this point of view. When you are pitching your venture capital company, your startup's the venture capital out there, the assumption is that your tech has to be protected. The reality is, if you pick any niche cybersecurity technology, we've probably looked at 5 to 6 to 10 different companies in that space. Now, you might have different speeds and feeds. You might have different costs of doing those things. You might have different approaches to doing those things, but it might not be as unique as you think it is. And putting it under NDA, trying to kind of put a little bit of cloak and dagger behind it, can actually do you a disservice, especially to somebody who's seen a lot of deals. They're going to instantly try to categorize you as one of those things, or use your evasiveness or ability to obscure that thing as perhaps not being transparent about what you are solving. Now, another thing is you might be speaking to dozens of VCs. I've actually seen this approach with startups as well, where they have an NDA. They have an NDA with all these different VCs, and I ask them, are you keeping track of the information that you told them? Did you record your conversations with them? Did you write notes about did you mention a customer name? Almost nobody does this, right? There's usually a folder with NDAs that maybe your legal counsel or your GC has, but there really isn't an effort to do any type of actual data sensitivity management and track who knows what. So a lot of times I kind of question it. Are they doing it just to have the NDA in place? And that can definitely be a counterproductive thing if you have a lot of NDAs and you don't track of what you told. Now, the last thing is, don't pitch a VC ever without looking at their portfolio. You should understand their portfolio and see if they have anything remotely competitive. I will turn down a meeting if I think somebody is competitive with one of our portfolio companies. And I will actually ask, hey, we're invested in company XYZ, company A, B, and C. They're kind of in this space. Do you feel you're competitive with that? If you still feel like you want to pitch Gula Tech Adventures, go ahead and do it. But there's a lot of folks who we haven't taken pitches from because it's a direct competition to what we have. If you're on the startup side and you're making that mistake, it's interesting. And no NDA in the world is going to really prevent you from educating and perhaps having the information you're sharing kind of being used against you. Now, this is the final point, right? The goal of your meeting should be to share enough information where you want to get to an NDA. You want to actually enter into a relationship with a potential investor who is going to care enough to look at your books, look at your financials, do some tech diligence, talk to your customers. You want to be under NDA for that. So you want to actually have, at that point, somebody who's seriously considered what's going on. So I always tell people, look, I don't want to start off with an NDA. I don't want to just be under NDA. Just, the goal of your meeting, your first meeting, your second meeting should be to get the potential investor interested in your company enough to sign an NDA, commit to a legal non-disclosure, and basically commit to doing diligence on your company. So that's my advice for people out there. Remember, I am not a lawyer, but it is something to keep in mind when you're out there talking and raising money as a startup. Now, as you go to Series A, Series B, Series C, things change, right? Once you're actually making money, you have a lot of customers to protect, a lot of employees to protect. It's a much more commonplace to have NDAs before you do that. But as a startup, it just isn't. If you enjoyed this video, we've got a lot of other non-cybersecurity sort of business go-to-market videos here on the channel. Some of these we branded as the VC 101 series. Some of these we just talked about pitches in general. Feel free to subscribe and learn more. We're pretty active on LinkedIn. You can always chat me up there, give us suggestions for videos, ask questions, or visit us at gula.tech, where you can see all these videos and our portfolio companies and also the nonprofits that we help out in cyberspace. I'm Ron Gula. Have a great day.